The roar of motorcycle engines rattled the windows of Iron Mesa Tavern, a battered bar that stood like a sentinel at the edge of the desert highway. Chrome sparkled under the brutal afternoon sun as rows of bikes lined the gravel lot. Their owners gathered inside for the annual Brotherhood Run, a tradition older than most of the riders themselves. The air was thick with the scent of leather, motor oil, and the mesquite smoke drifting from the outdoor grill where steak sizzled for the evening meal. This wasn't a place for the timid. The patched leather vests, the scarred knuckles, the hard eyes that had seen too much, they all told the same story. These men had earned their respect the difficult way, through loyalty, sacrifice, and an unbreakable code that outsiders would never fully understand. At the center of it all sat Victor Blade Stone, a mountain of a man whose reputation stretched across 3 states. His vest bore patches that chronicled decades on the road, president of the Rattlesnake Riders chapter, a brotherhood forged in fire and sealed with blood. His beard was gray now, streaked with white, and deep lines carved his weathered face like roads on a map. Each line told a story: prison time in his youth, wars both literal and metaphorical, betrayals that cut deep, and victories hard-won. He had survived things that would have broken lesser men. Nothing rattled him anymore. Or so he believed. But that belief was about to shatter, destroyed by the desperate voice of a 7-year-old girl who would appear out of nowhere with terror in her eyes and words that would save his life. The tavern buzzed with rough laughter and clinking glasses. Bikers traded stories of the road, near misses with highway patrol, breakdowns in the middle of nowhere, that time in Reno when 3 of them had to fight their way out of a bar after someone disrespected their colors. They slapped backs and toasted fallen brothers, men whose names were spoken with reverence, whose memories lived on in the patches sewn onto vests and the stories told on nights like this. The jukebox in the corner played old rock anthems that everyone knew by heart, songs about freedom, rebellion, and the open road. The kind of music that spoke to men who had chosen a life outside society's boundaries, who found family not in blood but in shared miles and mutual respect. Blade sat at the head table with his closest brothers. To his right was Marcus Hammer Johnson, his vice president, a man who had been riding beside him for 18 years. Hammer was built like a tank, with hands that could crush steel and a laugh that could shake windows. To his left sat Diego Snake Martinez, the club's sergeant-at-arms, responsible for security and enforcement. Snake was quiet, watchful, with eyes that missed nothing and a reputation for settling problems before they escalated. Also at the table were Tommy Rev Reynolds, the club mechanic who could rebuild an engine blindfolded, and Michael Doc Patterson, a former Army medic who had saved more lives on the roadside than most doctors save in hospitals. These were Blade's inner circle, men he trusted with his life, men who had proven themselves 1,000 times over. The bartender, a grizzled veteran named Frank who had served this crowd for 20 years, brought over a fresh pitcher of beer and a bottle of whiskey. "Blade, as usual," he said, his voice rough from decades of cigarettes. The amber liquid caught the light as Frank poured it into a glass, sliding it across the scarred wooden table with practiced ease. Frank had seen everything in his 2 decades behind this bar. He'd broken up fights, called ambulances, kept secrets, and occasionally called the sheriff when things got too far out of hand. He knew most of these men by name, knew their drink orders, knew which topics to avoid and which stories to encourage. He was as much a part of the Brotherhood Run tradition as the motorcycles themselves. Blade nodded his thanks, his thick fingers reaching for the glass, ready to make a toast to the brothers who couldn't be here, the ones who had fallen over the years to accidents, violence, or simply time's relentless march. There was Joey Ace Brennan, who had died in a collision with a drunk driver 5 years ago. There was Russell Bear Thompson, killed in a shootout with a rival gang. There was Kevin Throttle Walsh, who had succumbed to cancer 2 winters back. Their names were spoken before every drink, their memories honored in ritual and remembrance. But before his fingers closed around the glass, a small shape burst through the open door, moving with frantic urgency. Conversation stuttered. Heads turned. Every set of eyes in the tavern locked onto the intruder. A tiny girl in a bright blue dress, her light brown hair cut in a practical bob that framed her small, dirt-smudged face. Her bare feet left dusty prints on the floor, and she was out of breath, chest heaving, eyes wide with panic. She looked completely out of place in this den of leather and steel, like a sparrow that had flown into a lion's cage. Her name was Emma Rodriguez, though nobody there knew it yet. And for the past 2 weeks, she had been living in a nightmare that no child should ever know. To understand the courage it took for Emma to burst through that door, you have to understand where she had been. 2 weeks earlier, Emma had been a normal 7-year-old girl living in a small town 200 miles south with her father, Carlos Rodriguez, a long-haul truck driver who doted on his only daughter. Her mother had died from cancer when Emma was just 4, leaving Carlos to raise her alone. Carlos was a good man, hardworking and devoted. He took Emma on short hauls when school was out, teaching her about the trucks, the roads, the importance of paying attention to details. Emma, he would say, pointing out landmarks and reading highway signs, the world is full of people who don't notice things. But you're special. You see what others miss. That's going to serve you well in life. Emma adored these trips. She loved the rumble of the engine, the changing landscapes outside the window, the CB radio chatter, and the truck stop diners where her father would buy her pancakes with extra syrup. She felt safe in that truck, protected by her father's steady presence and constant love. But 2 weeks ago, everything changed. Carlos was driving through a remote stretch of desert highway when his truck broke down, a catastrophic engine failure that left him stranded miles from anywhere. He had pulled off onto a side road to assess the damage, trying to radio for help, when disaster struck. While attempting to climb under the vehicle to check the transmission, the jack slipped. The truck shifted, and Carlos's leg was caught, crushed between metal and earth. He managed to pull himself free, but the pain told him immediately that something was badly broken. He couldn't walk. He couldn't climb into the cab to reach the CB radio. His cell phone had fallen during the accident and was crushed under the tire. He was trapped. Before the accident, knowing he would be out on a long haul, Carlos had left Emma with a neighbor, Mrs. Patricia Hendricks, a woman he barely knew but who had seemed friendly enough. It was supposed to be for 3 days, 4 at most. He had paid her in advance and promised to call Emma every night. But when Carlos didn't return and the calls stopped coming, Mrs. Hendricks revealed her true nature. She was a bitter, cruel woman who saw Emma as an inconvenience, an unwanted burden. She fed the girl barely enough to survive, stale bread, thin soup, scraps that she wouldn't feed to a dog. She locked Emma in the garden shed at night, telling her to stop crying, to stop asking about her father, to stop being such a problem. Emma endured this for nearly 2 weeks, growing thinner, more frightened, more desperate. She asked Mrs. Hendricks repeatedly to help find her father, to call the police, to do something. But the woman just laughed. Your father's probably dead in a ditch somewhere, or he ran off because he didn't want to deal with a brat like you anymore. The words cut deep, but Emma didn't believe them. She knew her father. He would never abandon her. Something terrible must have happened, and if the adults wouldn't help, she would have to help herself. 3 days before she burst into Iron Mesa Tavern, Emma made her escape. She had been studying the shed where she was locked each night, looking for weaknesses the way her father had taught her to notice details. She found one, a loose board at the back, old and rotted. She worked at it night after night with her small fingers until finally, it gave way, creating a gap just large enough for her tiny body to squeeze through. She ran. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to get away, had to find help, had to find her father. She survived on water from irrigation ditches and scraps she found behind gas stations. She walked during the cooler morning and evening hours, hiding during the brutal midday heat. She slept in abandoned buildings, under bridges, anywhere she could find shelter. She was hungry, exhausted, and terrified. But she was also determined. Her father had always told her she was strong, that she could do hard things. She held on to those words like a lifeline. And she watched. She watched people, trying to figure out who might help and who might hurt her more. She had learned the hard way that not all adults could be trusted. So she stayed hidden, invisible, a ghost moving through the edges of the world. Until that afternoon, when hunger drove her behind the dumpster in the alley behind Iron Mesa Tavern, searching desperately for something, anything to eat. The man who slipped into the back alley that day was named Ryan Donovan, though Emma didn't know it at the time. All she knew was that something about him screamed danger. He moved wrong, too quickly, too nervously, checking over his shoulder constantly like someone who knew he was doing something terrible. Ryan Donovan was 28 years old, thin and wiry, with a scorpion tattoo on his neck and grease permanently embedded under his fingernails from years of working in auto shops. 6 months earlier, he had tried to join the Rattlesnake Riders. He had shown up at their clubhouse, eager and desperate to belong to something bigger than himself. But the club had rejected him. During his prospect period, the months-long trial where potential members proved their loyalty, reliability, and character, Ryan had failed spectacularly. He had been caught stealing from another prospect. He had started a fight at a club event, drawing unwanted police attention. He had been unreliable, showing up late or not at all when the club needed him. Most damningly, he had been caught talking to a member of a rival gang, trying to play both sides. When confronted, he had lied, then tried to shift blame, then finally broken down and begged for another chance. Blade had been the one to deliver the verdict. "You don't have what it takes to be one of us," he had said, his voice hard but not cruel. "This life requires loyalty, honor, and putting your brothers before yourself. You've proven you don't have any of those qualities. You're out. Don't come back." The rejection had devastated Ryan, but more than that, it had enraged him. In his twisted mind, the failure wasn't his fault, it was Blade's. Blade had been too harsh, too judgmental, too unfair. Blade had robbed him of his chance to be somebody, to be respected, to be feared. For 6 months, that hatred had festered like an infected wound. Ryan drank heavily, lost his job, and spiraled into a dark place where revenge became his only focus. He studied Blade's habits, the club's routines, looking for an opening, a way to strike back. The Brotherhood run was perfect. Blade would be at Iron Mesa Tavern, surrounded by his brothers but also relaxed, off guard, celebrating. Frank always poured Blade the same whiskey, always kept a bottle behind the bar specifically for him. It was predictable, routine. And routine could be exploited. Ryan had spent 2 weeks planning. He had bought antifreeze from 3 different stores so no one purchase would be memorable. He had practiced his approach, timing how long it would take to slip in through the back, dose the bottle, and slip out. He had planned his escape route and prepared his alibi. What he hadn't planned for was a 7-year-old girl with sharp eyes and her father's gift for noticing details. Emma had been crouched behind the dumpster, eating a half-eaten sandwich she had found, when Ryan appeared. Something about him made her freeze. Her instincts, honed by 2 weeks of survival, screamed danger. She made herself small, invisible, watching. She saw him approach the back door of the tavern. She saw him check his surroundings, missing her in his nervousness. She saw him slip inside through the kitchen entrance, which Frank had left propped open to let out the heat from the grill. Emma's curiosity overcame her caution. She crept to the kitchen window, filthy and cracked, and peered inside. The kitchen was small and cluttered with supplies, and through it, she could see into the bar area where the bikers gathered. What she saw next made her heart pound so hard she thought everyone in the tavern would hear it. Ryan pulled a small vial from his jacket pocket. His hands shook as he uncapped it. Emma watched him look around nervously, then reach for a bottle on the counter, a whiskey bottle with a distinctive label, the same bottle she had seen the bartender carrying to the big bearded man at the head table just minutes before. Ryan tipped the vial, and a clear liquid poured into the whiskey. He recapped the bottle, shook it gently to mix the contents, then carefully placed it back exactly where he had found it. His face, visible in profile through the window, twisted with an expression Emma recognized, hatred, pure and venomous. He muttered something under his breath. Emma couldn't hear the words, but she understood their meaning. This man wanted someone dead. Ryan slipped back out the way he came, vanishing into the maze of alleys before anyone noticed. Emma remained frozen at the window, her mind racing. She didn't know what the liquid was, but she knew it was bad. She knew someone was going to drink that whiskey and get hurt. Badly hurt. Maybe even die. The smart thing to do would be to run. To stay hidden and stay safe the way she had been doing. She didn't know these people. They were scary-looking bikers, the kind of men her father had always warned her to stay away from. Getting involved could mean getting noticed, and getting noticed could mean being sent back to Mrs. Hendricks or somewhere equally terrible. But Emma's father had taught her something else too. He had taught her that good people don't walk away when they can help. That noticing things meant nothing if you didn't act on what you saw. That courage wasn't the absence of fear, it was doing the right thing even when you were terrified. Emma thought about her father, wherever he was. She thought about what he would do. And she knew. She gathered what little courage she had left, took a deep breath that hurt her empty stomach, and ran toward the front door. The moment Emma burst through the door, the atmosphere in the tavern changed. It was like a record skipping, the music and conversation stuttering to a halt as dozens of hard men turned to stare at the tiny intruder. Emma's feet left dusty prints on the floor. Her blue dress, which her father had bought her for her 7th birthday 3 months ago, was torn at the hem and stained beyond recognition. Her knees were scraped and bleeding from falls during her desperate journey. Her face was smudged with grime, and her hair stuck up at odd angles. She looked like something from a Dickens novel, a street urchin, desperate and wild. But her eyes were clear and focused. They locked onto the biggest man in the room, the one at the head table, the one whose hand was reaching for that glass of poisoned whiskey. "Don't drink that." Her voice cracked with desperation, high and clear in the sudden silence. She pointed at the glass in front of Blade with a trembling finger. "Don't drink it, please." The tavern erupted. Men stood, chairs scraped against the floor, voices rose in confusion and anger. "Who the hell is that?" someone shouted. "How did a kid get in here? Someone get her out of here." Several bikers moved toward her, not threateningly, but firmly, ready to escort her out. This was no place for children, especially not frightened little girls interrupting their gathering. The Brotherhood Run was sacred, a time for the club to come together without outside interference. Hammer, Blade's vice president, moved first, his massive frame approaching Emma with practiced intimidation. "Kid, you need to leave. This isn't a place for please." Emma's voice rose to a near scream. "The whiskey is poisoned. I saw a man put something in it. Please don't drink it." The word "poisoned" cut through the noise like a knife. Conversation stopped. Movement halted. Everyone turned to look at Blade, who sat frozen, his hand still extended toward the glass. Blade himself stared at Emma with a mixture of surprise and irritation. His thick eyebrows drew together, creating deep furrows in his weathered forehead. He wasn't used to being interrupted, much less by someone who barely reached his belt buckle. For a moment, anger flashed in his eyes, anger at the disruption, at the accusation, at the chaos this child had brought into his sanctuary. But something made him pause. Something about the raw fear in her eyes, fear that wasn't directed at him or his brothers, but at that glass of whiskey. Something about the way she wasn't begging or crying or looking for attention. She was warning him, genuinely, desperately trying to protect him from something. Her entire body shook, not from cold but from the sheer effort of finding the courage to speak. She looked like she had been through hell, like she was running on nothing but determination and desperation. Yet here she stood, in a room full of dangerous-looking men, shouting at their president to save his life. Blade had survived 52 years by trusting his instincts. And right now, every instinct he had was telling him to listen to this child. He held up a massive hand, silencing the room instantly. His brothers stopped moving, waiting. He had led them for 15 years, and they trusted his judgment absolutely. If Blade said to stop, they stopped. If he said to listen, they listened. The tavern fell into an eerie silence. Even the jukebox seemed to quiet, though it still played the same song. Blade leaned forward, his weathered face level with Emma's. Up close, she could see the scars, one across his left eyebrow, another along his jawline. His eyes were a surprising blue-gray, like storm clouds, and they studied her with an intensity that should have been terrifying but somehow wasn't. "Why?" he asked simply, his voice surprisingly gentle despite its gravelly depth. "Why shouldn't I drink it?" Emma's words tumbled out in a rush, tripping over each other in her desperation to make him understand before it was too late. She told him about the man in the alley, about hiding behind the dumpster, about watching through the window. She described seeing the vial, seeing the man pour something into the whiskey bottle, seeing his face twisted with hatred. Her sentences were fragmented, jumbled by fear and exhaustion, but the core message was clear. Someone had poisoned that drink. Someone wanted him dead. She described the man as best she could, her words painting a picture that grew more detailed with each sentence. He was thin, really thin, like he doesn't eat much. And nervous, he kept looking around like he was scared of getting caught. He wore a dark jacket with grease stains on the sleeves. And he had a tattoo on his neck, right here. She touched her own neck, that looked like a scorpion. It was black with red eyes. And he moved weird, really quick and jerky, like he knew he was doing something really, really bad. The description hit Blade like a physical blow. His face went pale beneath his tan, and his jaw clenched. He knew exactly who she was talking about. Ryan Donovan, he said quietly, the name tasting like poison itself. Snake leaned forward from his seat. "The prospect we kicked out." Blade nodded slowly, his mind racing. 6 months ago, they had rejected Donovan from the club after he had failed to prove his loyalty. The kid had taken it badly, making threats, vowing revenge. But they had been empty threats from a weak man trying to sound tough. Or so they had thought. "I remember him," Hammer said grimly. "He said he'd make you pay for humiliating him. We figured he was just running his mouth." "We were wrong," Blade said. He looked at the glass in front of him, the amber liquid that suddenly seemed sinister, malevolent. Then his gaze returned to Emma, this tiny, filthy, brave little girl who had risked everything to warn a stranger. He made a decision. "Frank," he called out, his voice carrying easily across the silent tavern. "Get this tested now. Don't let anyone drink from that bottle. And someone lock down the back entrance. Nobody leaves until we figure this out." The tavern exploded into controlled chaos. These men were not strangers to crisis. Many had military backgrounds. Others had lived through gang wars and violent conflicts. They knew how to respond quickly and efficiently. Two brothers, a man nicknamed Turbo and another called Reaper, ran to secure the exits, front and back. Others pulled out phones, calling contacts in law enforcement, medical facilities, and chemistry labs. The Rattlesnake Riders had been operating in this area for decades, building relationships and earning respect from people who understood that bikers weren't all criminals, that many were veterans, family men, and community members who just happened to prefer 2 wheels to 4. Frank grabbed the glass with a bar towel, his face pale as he realized what might have happened if Emma hadn't intervened. His hands shook slightly as he set it carefully on the bar, treating it like the deadly weapon it was. He retrieved the whiskey bottle from behind the bar, still half full, still sitting innocently on the shelf where he had left it, and set it beside the glass. "Jesus Christ," Frank muttered, staring at the bottle. "I poured from that bottle for 3 other guys already tonight." "Why didn't they? You poured from a different bottle," Snake said, his sharp memory kicking in. "I saw you open a fresh one for Johnson and the others. This bottle," he pointed at the distinctive label, "you only use for Blade." The implication hung in the air. Ryan Donovan had known Blade's habits, known which bottle Frank kept specifically for him. This wasn't random. This was targeted, personal, and meticulously planned. Within minutes, the local sheriff arrived, lights flashing, followed by an ambulance and a hazmat team from the county hospital. The sheriff, a man named Jake Collins, had worked with the Rattlesnake Riders on community safety initiatives before. 3 years ago, when a series of break-ins had plagued the area, the club had set up neighborhood watch patrols that had been more effective than anything his department could organize. When a child had gone missing last summer, it was the riders who had found her, their knowledge of the back roads and desert terrain proving invaluable. Collins trusted these men more than most of the civilians who called themselves law-abiding citizens. He took one look at the scene, the glass, the bottle, the tiny girl sitting in a booth with a plate of food she was devouring like she hadn't eaten in days, the circle of protective bikers surrounding her, and immediately understood the gravity of the situation. "Talk to me," he said to Blade. Blade explained quickly and efficiently, Emma's warning, Ryan Donovan's history with the club, the description that matched perfectly. Collins listened, took notes, and immediately radioed for a field testing kit. The testing was performed by a technician from the hazmat team, a young woman named Dr. Sarah Chen who specialized in toxicology. She used a portable chemical analysis kit, carefully extracting samples from both the glass and the bottle. The results came back quickly, and they were damning. "Ethylene glycol," Dr. Chen said grimly, showing Collins and Blade the readout on her tablet. "Antifreeze. And a lot of it. Based on the concentration, if someone of your size," she looked at Blade, "consumed even half that glass, you'd be in organ failure within hours. By the time symptoms appeared and you got to a hospital, it would likely be too late. Your kidneys would shut down, your heart would go into arrhythmia, and—" She trailed off, not needing to finish. "How long would he have had?" Collins asked. 6 to 12 hours before the damage became irreversible. The sweet taste would have been masked by the whiskey's burn. By the time he felt sick enough to seek help, the poison would have done its work. The coroner would have likely ruled it organ failure, maybe a heart attack brought on by years of hard living. Without knowing to look for antifreeze specifically, it would have seemed natural. She paused. This was a very well-planned murder attempt. The room fell silent as the weight of those words sank in. Blade had come within seconds of drinking that glass. Within seconds of a slow, agonizing death that would have looked like natural causes. And the only thing that had stopped it was a 7-year-old girl who noticed something wrong and had the courage to speak up. Collins immediately issued an APB for Ryan Donovan, all-points bulletin, notifying every law enforcement agency in the state to be on the lookout. He included Donovan's description, his vehicle information from DMV records, known associates, and a scorpion neck tattoo that made him easy to identify. "He'll run," Snake said quietly. "He's probably already running." "Then we'll find him," Collins replied. "He can't have gotten far." Ryan Donovan was found 3 hours later at a budget motel 40 miles east, frantically packing his bags, preparing to flee. He had checked in under a fake name, but the desk clerk, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes who had been alerted by the APB, recognized the scorpion tattoo when he came out of his room to get ice. She called it in, and within 10 minutes, 3 sheriff's vehicles and 2 state police cars surrounded the motel. Donovan was arrested without incident, his bravado evaporating the moment he saw the uniforms. They searched his room and found damning evidence: 2 more bottles of antifreeze hidden in his duffel bag, a notebook with detailed notes about Blade's schedule and habits, and receipts from 3 different auto supply stores where he had purchased the poison. The most chilling discovery was in that notebook. Ryan had written, in careful detail, his plans for after the murder. He believed that killing Blade would prove his worth, that the club would see him as strong and fearless, that they would beg him to join. His delusion was complete and terrifying. At the police station, Collins and a state investigator named Detective Maria Hernandez interrogated Ryan. They showed him the evidence, the security footage from a gas station that morning showing him purchasing antifreeze, his fingerprints on the bottle from the tavern, lifted from the residue on the rim, the chemical analysis proving the presence of ethylene glycol. But the most powerful evidence was something intangible, the testimony of a 7-year-old girl who had no reason to lie, whose description was so precise that it could only have come from actual observation. Faced with overwhelming evidence, Ryan broke within an hour of questioning. The interrogation was recorded, and his confession was chilling in its self-justification. "He humiliated me," Ryan said, his voice bitter. "In front of everyone. He told me I wasn't good enough, that I didn't have what it takes. Do you know what that feels like? To be rejected by the people you want to be part of? To be told you're worthless. So you decided to kill him," Hernandez said flatly. "I decided to prove I was stronger than he thought. That I could do something he'd never see coming. And I almost did it. I would have succeeded if it wasn't for." He trailed off, reality finally sinking in. "If it wasn't for a brave little girl who saw what you did and warned him," Collins finished. Ryan's face crumpled. "A kid. A fucking kid ruined everything." The confession was complete and damning. Ryan Donovan was charged with attempted murder in the first degree, tampering with food or drink with intent to cause harm, and criminal conspiracy. His public defender tried to negotiate, but the evidence was too strong, the intent too clear. He would eventually plead guilty in exchange for a slightly reduced sentence, 20 years with the possibility of parole after 15. He would spend the best years of his life in a prison where his scorpion tattoo and attempted murder of a respected biker president made him a target. His time would be hard, and his regrets would be endless. Back at the tavern, as police finished collecting evidence and statements, the Rattlesnake Riders turned their attention to the little girl who had saved their president's life. Emma had been given food, real food, more than she could eat. Burgers, fries, chicken wings, a salad, which she ignored in favor of the burgers, fresh fruit that tasted like heaven after days of scraps. She ate with a desperate intensity that broke the hearts of the hardened men watching. One of the biker's girlfriends, a woman named Lisa who had arrived with several others after hearing what happened, gently took Emma to the tavern's bathroom and helped her clean up. She washed the girl's face and hands, brushed the tangles from her hair, and spoke to her in soft, soothing tones. "You're safe now, honey," Lisa said, kneeling beside Emma. "Nobody's going to hurt you here. These men might look scary, but they're good people. And you just did the bravest thing I've ever seen." Emma, exhausted and overwhelmed, finally allowed herself to cry, really cry, for the first time since her father had disappeared. Lisa held her, letting the tears come, understanding that sometimes courage meant holding on until you found safety, and then finally letting go. When Emma emerged from the bathroom, cleaner but still wearing her torn blue dress, Blade was waiting. He knelt down, an effort for a man his size, bringing himself to her eye level. "Emma," he said gently, "we need to know what happened to you. How you ended up here. Why you were alone." And so, with Lisa beside her and a room full of attentive bikers listening, Emma told her story. She spoke quietly, factually, as if recounting someone else's life rather than her own. She told them about her father, about the truck that broke down, about being left with Mrs. Hendricks who turned cruel. She described the locked shed, the hunger, the escape. She talked about surviving on the streets, about searching desperately for help but being too afraid to approach most adults because she didn't know who to trust. As she spoke, more than one hardened biker wiped at their eyes. These were men who had seen violence and tragedy, who prided themselves on being tough. But hearing this tiny girl describe her ordeal with such matter-of-fact courage broke something open in them. "Why didn't you go to the police?" someone asked gently. Emma looked down at her hands. "Mrs. Hendricks said if I told anyone, they'd take me away and put me somewhere worse. She said my dad probably didn't want me anymore anyway, and nobody would believe a kid over an adult. I was scared they'd just send me back to her." The fear made sense. Too many children in bad situations had learned that adults couldn't always be trusted, that systems designed to protect could also fail. "And your father?" Blade asked. "Do you know where he is?" Emma's lower lip trembled. "He broke down somewhere in the desert. He always called me every night when he was on the road. Always. He never missed. But the calls stopped 2 weeks ago. Something bad happened. I know it did. He wouldn't just leave me. He wouldn't." Her absolute faith in her father's love was both heartbreaking and inspiring. When she finished, Blade stood and turned to his brothers. His voice carried across the now quiet tavern, resonating with authority and emotion. "This little girl saved my life today. She risked everything to warn a stranger. She could have stayed hidden, stayed safe, but she chose to help. That takes more guts than anything I've seen in a long time." He paused, letting his words sink in. "We owe her. We owe her everything." The response was immediate and unanimous. These men, often judged harshly by society, understood debt and honor better than most. They understood what it meant to have someone save your life, to owe a debt that could never truly be repaid. "We find her father," Hammer said firmly. "Whatever it takes," Snake added. "We bring him home," Doc Patterson said. Within an hour, they had mobilized their considerable resources. Phone calls were made. Contacts were activated. The Rattlesnake Riders had connections that spanned law enforcement, search and rescue teams, private investigators, emergency services, and volunteer organizations. They knew people who knew people, and they weren't afraid to call in favors. A phone tree spread the word: Carlos Rodriguez, truck driver, missing somewhere in the desert after a breakdown 2 weeks ago. Brown truck with yellow lettering. Last known location somewhere between Iron Mesa and the southern counties. 2 members who owned small planes offered to conduct aerial searches. Another brother worked for a trucking company and accessed their satellite tracking systems to identify possible breakdown locations. Someone else contacted a network of CB radio enthusiasts who monitored emergency frequencies and might have heard something. Emma watched all this activity with wide eyes, not quite believing that these scary-looking men were mobilizing an entire operation just to help her find her father. Blade pulled up a chair beside her. "Emma, I need you to think carefully. Did your father ever mention where he was going? What route he was taking?" Emma nodded slowly. "He said he was delivering auto parts to Copper Junction, and then he was taking a shortcut through the desert because he wanted to get home faster. He said there was a back road that truckers used to avoid way stations." "That was good information." "Very good." Snake pulled up a map on his tablet and showed it to Emma. "Can you show me approximately where? Even just the general area would help." Emma studied the map, her small finger tracing routes. "Here," she said finally, pointing to a remote section of desert between 2 minor highways. "He always went this way. He said it saved 50 miles. Snake marked the location and immediately shared it with the search teams. The area Emma indicated was vast, maybe 200 square miles of desert terrain with numerous side roads and canyon systems. But it was a starting point, better than searching the entire state. "We start at first light," Blade announced. "Full search operation. We bring Carlos Rodriguez home." That night, Emma slept in the tavern's back office, which Lisa and the other women converted into a temporary bedroom. They brought a cot, clean blankets, pillows, and a stuffed bear that someone's daughter had donated. Emma fell asleep almost instantly, wrapped in a leather jacket that Blade had given her because it was the warmest thing available. But before she slept, Blade came in to check on her. He sat on the edge of the cot, this massive man somehow gentle in his movements. "Emma," he said quietly, "you did something incredibly brave today. You trusted your instincts. You spoke up when it was hard and scary. And because of that, I'm still alive." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Where you've been, what you've survived these past weeks, that took courage too. You're one of the strongest people I've ever met." Emma looked up at him with tired eyes. "Are you really going to find my dad?" "Yes," Blade said without hesitation. "I promise you, we're going to find him and bring him home. And until we do, you're safe here. Nobody's going to hurt you. Nobody's going to send you back to that woman. You're under the protection of the Rattlesnake Riders now, and that means something." "What does it mean?" Emma asked sleepily. Blade smiled, the expression transforming his weathered face. "It means your family. And we protect our family. Always." Emma fell asleep with those words wrapped around her like armor. Outside, the bikers organized the search in detail. Maps were studied. Routes were plotted. Teams were assigned. Someone contacted the Civil Air Patrol, a volunteer organization that assisted in search and rescue operations. Others reached out to local ranchers who knew the desert terrain intimately. By midnight, they had a comprehensive search plan. At dawn, 30 motorcycles, 12 trucks, 2 small aircraft, and a helicopter, piloted by a retired military member who owed Blade a favor, would begin scouring the desert for any sign of Carlos Rodriguez or his truck. They would also coordinate with Sheriff Collins, who was mobilizing official search and rescue resources. The Rattlesnake Riders might operate outside conventional society, but when it came to saving lives, they worked hand in hand with law enforcement. Dawn broke over the desert in brilliant oranges and golds, the sun climbing over distant mesas and painting the landscape in colors that seemed almost unreal. By 6 a.m., the search teams were assembled in the tavern parking lot. Emma stood with Lisa, watching as the bikers prepared to leave. Blade approached, fully geared up, his helmet under one arm. "We're going to bring him home," he told Emma again. "Can I come?" she asked hopefully. Blade knelt down. "Not this time, little guardian. You've done your part, you've already been the hero. Now it's our turn. You stay here with Lisa and the others where it's safe. We'll call you the moment we find anything." Emma wanted to protest, but she was too exhausted to argue. And truthfully, she felt safe here in a way she hadn't felt since her father disappeared. These rough, intimidating men had shown her more genuine care in one night than Mrs. Hendricks had shown in 2 weeks. The search was methodical and thorough. The team spread out across the designated area, maintaining radio contact. The aircraft provided aerial surveillance, their pilots scanning the ground for any sign of a vehicle, tire tracks, or human presence. It was tough work. The desert was vast and unforgiving, with countless side roads, dry washes, and canyon systems that could hide a truck. The heat climbed rapidly as morning turned to afternoon, the sun beating down mercilessly. But these were experienced men, many with military or search and rescue backgrounds. They knew how to grid search an area, how to look for signs others might miss, how to work as a coordinated team. Hours passed with no results. Then more hours. Some of the searchers began to worry privately that Carlos might not have survived, that 2 weeks in the desert without help might have been too long. But they didn't give up. They had made a promise to a 7-year-old girl who had saved their president's life. And the Rattlesnake Riders didn't break promises. It was the helicopter pilot, a man nicknamed Hawk for his sharp eyes, who spotted it. At 3:47 p.m., flying over a remote canyon system 17 miles from the nearest paved road, he saw a glint of metal in a narrow gorge that vehicles rarely accessed. "I've got something," his voice crackled over the radio. "Sending coordinates now. Looks like a truck, dark-colored, partially hidden by an overhang." The nearest ground teams converged on the location, navigating treacherous terrain that tested even their skilled riding. Blade and Snake were among the first to arrive, parking their bikes and climbing down into the gorge on foot. There it was, a dark brown truck with faded yellow lettering, just as Emma had described. It was tilted at an angle, one wheel suspended over the edge of a small ravine. The driver's side door was open, and supplies were scattered around the vehicle, water bottles, food wrappers, a makeshift shelter constructed from a tarp. And slumped against a rock 20 feet from the truck, unconscious but alive, was Carlos Rodriguez. Carlos was in bad shape. His broken leg had swollen grotesquely, the makeshift splint he had constructed barely holding. He was severely dehydrated, his lips cracked and bleeding, his skin sunburned and peeling. But he had a pulse, and when Doc Patterson administered fluids and checked his vitals, he determined that Carlos could be saved. "He's a fighter," Doc said admiringly as they carefully loaded Carlos onto a stretcher. 2 weeks out here with a broken leg, limited supplies, no way to call for help, most men wouldn't have lasted this long. The helicopter, which had landed on a flat area nearby, transported Carlos directly to the county hospital. Blade and several others rode alongside in trucks, maintaining constant contact with the tavern. When they called Lisa with the news, she put the phone on speaker so Emma could hear. "Emma," Blade's voice came through, warm and triumphant, "we found him. We found your father. He's alive, and he's going to be okay." Emma burst into tears, tears of relief, joy, and overwhelming gratitude. Lisa held her while she cried, tears streaming down her own face. 2 days later, when Carlos had been stabilized and was strong enough for visitors, Emma was brought to the hospital. Blade drove her himself on his motorcycle, taking the curves slow and easy, letting her get comfortable with the ride. When they arrived, Emma was wearing new clothes that the bikers' families had donated, clean jeans, a fresh shirt, and new shoes that actually fit. Her hair was washed and brushed, and though she was still thin from her ordeal, she looked like a different child from the terrified girl who had burst into the tavern. Carlos Rodriguez was in a hospital bed in the intensive care unit, his leg in a cast elevated by a sling, for lines running into his arm. His face was bruised from his ordeal, but his eyes were alert. When Emma entered the room, those eyes filled with tears. "Emma," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "Daddy." Emma ran to him, careful of the wires and tubes, and Carlos wrapped his arms around his daughter with all the strength he could muster. They held each other and cried, deep, wrenching sobs that released 2 weeks of fear, pain, and desperate hope. No words were needed. The embrace said everything. Blade stood in the doorway, watching, feeling something shift in his chest. Something that had been hardened by years of rough living suddenly softening. He had saved lives before, pulled brothers out of burning buildings, stopped fights before they turned deadly, intervened in domestic violence situations in the community. But this felt different. This felt like he had been given a chance to be part of something pure, something good. When father and daughter finally pulled apart, Carlos looked up at Blade with eyes that shone with gratitude and tears. "You saved my daughter," he said simply. "And she saved you. I don't know how to thank you." "You don't need to," Blade replied. "Emma's the hero here. She's one of the bravest people I've ever met. You raised her right." Carlos smiled through his tears. "I just taught her to pay attention and trust her instincts. She did the rest herself." Over the next hour, they shared their stories. Carlos explained what had happened, the breakdown, the accident with the jack, the agonizing days waiting for rescue that never came. He had survived on water from a narrow seep in the canyon wall and the emergency supplies in his truck. He had tried repeatedly to climb out of the gorge to reach higher ground where he might get a cell signal, but his broken leg made it impossible. "I kept thinking about Emma," he said, his voice breaking. "I knew she was waiting for me. I knew I couldn't give up because she needed me. That's the only thing that kept me going." Emma, sitting on the edge of his bed, held his hand tightly. They told Carlos about Mrs. Hendricks, and his face darkened with rage. "I trusted her. I paid her good money to take care of my daughter, and he couldn't finish, overcome with fury and guilt. She's been arrested," Blade said quietly. "Child Services is building a case. She won't hurt Emma or any other child ever again." The legal system had indeed moved quickly. When Sheriff Collins learned what Mrs. Hendricks had done, how she had neglected and abused Emma, how she had refused to report Carlos missing or help search for him, he had personally arrested her. The charges were serious: child endangerment, neglect, false imprisonment. Her neighbors, once they heard what happened, came forward with their own complaints about mistreated children she had cared for in the past. She would face trial and, most likely, significant prison time. Carlos's recovery took weeks. His leg required surgery to properly set the broken bones, and the dehydration and exposure had damaged his kidneys, requiring careful monitoring. But the doctors were optimistic. With time and physical therapy, he would make a full recovery. During those weeks, the Rattlesnake Riders became a constant presence. They visited Carlos regularly, bringing food, books, and entertainment. They kept Emma company, taking turns staying with her so she was never alone. Several of the bikers' wives and girlfriends took Emma shopping for clothes, helped her with schoolwork she had missed, and generally mothered her with fierce protectiveness. Blade visited nearly every day. He and Carlos developed a friendship built on mutual respect and shared experience. Carlos learned that Blade was a veteran who had served 2 tours in Iraq, that he had built the Rattlesnake Riders into a community organization that raised money for veterans' causes, organized toy drives for underprivileged children, and maintained a strong code of honor. "We're not angels," Blade admitted one afternoon as they sat in Carlos's hospital room. "We've all done things we're not proud of. But we try to live by a code, loyalty, honor, protecting those who can't protect themselves. Your daughter embodied all of that when she warned me. She's got more courage than most men twice my size." Carlos nodded, pride shining in his eyes. "She's the best thing that ever happened to me. When her mother died, I didn't know if I could do it alone. Raise a daughter, teach her what she needed to know. But Emma, she's so strong. So smart. She notices things. Always has. That's what saved my life," Blade said. "She noticed what no one else would have seen." The club set up a fund to help the Rodriguez family get back on their feet. It started as a collection among members, everyone contributing what they could, but word spread. Other bikers' clubs contributed. Local businesses donated. People who heard Emma's story sent money from across the state. Within a month, the fund had grown to over $50,000. The money covered all of Carlos's medical bills, which had been astronomical. It replaced his truck, which had been too damaged by the accident and the desert elements to repair. It provided a down payment on a small house to rent in a safe neighborhood with good schools, allowing Emma stability and security. "It's not charity," Blade insisted when Carlos tried to refuse. "It's repaying a debt. Emma saved my life. There's no price tag on that. This is just trying to make sure she has the life she deserves." Carlos eventually accepted, understanding that refusing would actually insult the honor code these men lived by. They needed to repay their debt, and allowing them to do so was a gift in itself. On the day Carlos was released from the hospital, 6 weeks after the incident at Iron Mesa Tavern, the club threw a gathering at the tavern. This time, Emma walked in through the front door as an honored guest. She wore new clothes, jeans, a colorful shirt, and brand new sneakers. Her hair was brushed and shining, pulled back in a ponytail with a bright ribbon. But most importantly, she walked in with confidence, her head held high, her father beside her on crutches but standing tall with pride. The tavern erupted in applause when they entered. Bikers, their families, and community members who had heard Emma's story all stood and cheered. Someone had hung a banner that read, "Welcome home Rodriguez family," across the back wall. Emma blushed, overwhelmed by the attention, but she smiled, a genuine, joyful smile that transformed her small face. Blade stepped forward, and the room quieted. He held a small package wrapped in brown paper. "Emma Rodriguez," he said formally, "you did something 6 weeks ago that we'll never forget. You noticed something wrong. You trusted your instincts. And you had the courage to speak up and warn someone, even though you were terrified and didn't know if anyone would listen. Emma nodded, remembering that desperate moment when she burst through the door. Because of you, Blade continued, I'm still here. Because of you, my brothers still have their president. Because of you, a bad man who wanted to hurt people is in prison where he belongs. He paused, letting his words sink in. The Rattlesnake Riders have a tradition. We honor those who embody our values, courage, loyalty, protecting others. Today, we want to honor you. He unwrapped the package, revealing a small leather vest, child-sized, expertly crafted from soft, supple leather. On the back was a patch, beautifully embroidered with the club's rattlesnake logo, and below it, words that read, Honorary Member, Save the President. Emma's eyes went wide. Blade knelt down and held out the vest. If you want it, he said gently, you'd be the first honorary member we've ever had. You'd be part of our family officially. It doesn't mean you have to ride or come to every event. It just means that wherever you go, whatever you do, you've got brothers looking out for you. You've got family. Emma looked at her father, who nodded with tears in his eyes, giving his permission. Then she looked back at Blade and nodded. She put on the vest, and it fit perfectly. The leather was soft against her skin, and the weight of it felt important, significant. She turned around so everyone could see the patch, and the tavern erupted in applause again, louder this time, with whistles and cheers and shouts of approval. These hard men, criminals and rebels and outcasts, showed her more genuine love and respect in that moment than many people receive in a lifetime. Frank, the bartender, came over with a tray of drinks, soda and juice boxes this time. No whiskey today. Nobody had been able to bring themselves to drink whiskey since that day. Frank had actually poured out the entire remaining stock and switched to different brands, unable to look at those bottles without remembering what almost happened. The gathering lasted late into the evening. Emma received gifts, a bicycle from one family, a savings bond for college from another, a handmade quilt embroidered with motorcycles from one of the club's elderly mothers. But the best gift was simply being there, surrounded by people who valued her, who saw her courage and honored it. Blade gave a toast, raising his glass of soda high. To Emma Rodriguez, he said, his voice carrying across the room. The little guardian who saved my life. May she grow up knowing that courage isn't about being fearless, it's about doing the right thing even when you're scared. May she always trust her instincts. And may she always know that she's got a family here that will protect her, support her, and have her back no matter what. To Emma, the room chorused, glasses raised high. Emma, sitting between her father and Blade, felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, completely safe and utterly loved. Years passed. Emma grew up with the Rattlesnake Riders as her extended family. She attended every Brotherhood run, not as an outsider but as an honored member. She learned about motorcycles from Rev, who taught her engine mechanics. She learned about leadership from Blade, who showed her that respect must be earned through actions, not demanded through intimidation. She excelled in school, her teachers noting her exceptional observational skills and her courage in speaking up when she saw something wrong. She became a peer mediator, helping other students resolve conflicts. She volunteered at a local women's shelter, using her own experiences to help children in difficult situations. Carlos rebuilt his life with the club's support. He got a job as a dispatcher for a trucking company, allowing him to be home every night with his daughter. He never forgot what the Rattlesnake Riders had done for his family, and he volunteered regularly at their community events, helping organize toy drives, veteran support groups, and charity rides. He and Blade became close friends, an unlikely pairing that surprised everyone who saw them together, the long-haul trucker and the biker president, bonded by a shared experience and mutual respect. Emma kept the leather vest carefully preserved. As she grew, it became too small, but she couldn't bear to part with it. She had it professionally framed, the patch visible, a constant reminder of the day her courage had saved a life. When Emma was 17, she gave a speech at her high school about heroism. She told her story, all of it, holding nothing back. She talked about the terror of being alone, the hunger, the desperation. She described watching a man poison whiskey, the fear of speaking up, the moment she decided to warn Blade despite being terrified. Heroes aren't always big and strong, she told her classmates. Sometimes heroes are small and scared. But they do the right thing anyway. They notice things. They trust their instincts. And they speak up even when their voice shakes. The speech went viral online. News outlets picked it up. Emma was invited to speak at conferences about child safety, about trusting instincts, about the importance of teaching children that their observations matter. She always brought Blade with her to these events. He would stand at the back of the room, this mountain of a man with gray hair and weathered face, watching with pride as the tiny girl who had saved his life inspired thousands of others. When Emma graduated high school with honors, the entire Rattlesnake Riders chapter attended. They filled 3 rows of the auditorium, their leather vests a stark contrast to the suits and dresses of other families. But when Emma's name was called and she walked across the stage, they cheered louder than anyone, standing and applauding until the entire auditorium joined in. Emma went to college on a scholarship funded partially by the club's charity foundation. She studied criminal justice, hoping to work in child protective services, wanting to help other children who found themselves in situations like hers. Blade attended her college graduation too, though by then he was in his early 60s and had handed over leadership of the club to Hammer. He was still riding, still active, but he had slowed down, his body finally showing the wear of decades on the road. After the ceremony, Emma found him standing by his bike in the parking lot. "You came," she said, surprised and delighted. "Wouldn't miss it," he replied. "I've been to a lot of important things in my life, Emma. But watching you grow up, seeing you become the person you are, that's been one of the greatest privileges of my life." Emma hugged him, this man who had listened to her when she was terrified and alone, who had believed her when she warned him about danger, who had become family in every way that mattered. "I wouldn't be here without you," she said into his leather vest, which smelled the same as it had that day years ago, leather, motor oil, and freedom. "You'd have made it anyway," Blade said gently. "You've got that kind of strength. But I'm glad I got to be part of your journey." Years later, when Emma was 25 and working as a child advocate for the state, she received a call from the hospital. Blade had suffered a heart attack during a ride. It wasn't serious, he would recover, but he had asked for her. She went immediately, still wearing her work clothes, and found him in a hospital bed that looked too small for his large frame. "Thought I was done riding," he joked weakly. "Guess I've got a few more miles left." Emma sat beside his bed and held his hand, that massive, scarred hand that had offered her food and protection years ago. "You saved my life," he said quietly. "You saved mine too," Emma replied. "You believed me. You listened. You showed me that there are good people in the world who protect others. Everything I do now, every child I help, it's because you showed me what real strength looks like." Blade smiled, the expression softening his weathered face. "You were always strong, Emma. I just recognized it." He recovered from the heart attack and rode for several more years, though he finally retired from long trips and was content with short rides through the desert he loved. When Blade passed away at age 68, peacefully in his sleep after a life fully lived. The funeral was massive. Hundreds of bikers from across the country attended, their motorcycles lining the streets for miles. Law enforcement officers, community members, families whose lives had been touched by the Rattlesnake Riders' charity work, all came to pay their respects. Emma gave the eulogy. She stood at the podium, now a 30-year-old woman with her father's observational skills and her own hard-won strength, and she spoke about the day a little girl saved a biker's life. "Victor Blade Stone taught me something that changed my life," she said, her voice clear and strong. "He taught me that courage means listening when others might ignore. That true strength is protecting those who can't protect themselves. That family isn't always blood, sometimes it's the people who show up when you need them most." She pulled out a photograph, old and worn from being carried in her wallet for years. It showed a tiny girl in an oversized helmet sitting on a massive motorcycle, grinning at the camera with pure joy. Blade stood beside her, his hand on her shoulder, his face transformed by a genuine smile. "This was taken the day he gave me my vest," Emma said, holding up the photo so everyone could see. "The day I became an honorary member of the Rattlesnake Riders. I was 7 years old, and I had just been through the worst weeks of my life. But Blade and his brothers showed me that heroes are everywhere. That courage comes in all forms. And that sometimes the smallest person in the room has the biggest impact." She paused, tears streaming down her face. "I carry this photo everywhere I go. On the back, in my 7-year-old handwriting, it says, 'Thank you for listening. Love, Emma.' Today, I want to say it again, thank you for listening, Blade. Thank you for believing a terrified little girl who told you not to drink that whiskey. Thank you for showing me what real heroism looks like." The funeral procession stretched for miles, hundreds of motorcycles riding in formation through the desert, paying tribute to a man who had lived by a code of honor and died surrounded by the family he had built. Emma rode in that procession, on her own motorcycle now, wearing her original vest that had been carefully altered to fit her adult frame. The patch on the back, "Honorary Member, Saved the President," was faded but still visible, a reminder of the day everything changed. Emma never stopped telling the story. She spoke at schools, community centers, law enforcement training seminars, anywhere people would listen. She talked about the power of observation, the importance of trusting instincts, and the courage it takes to speak up when something feels wrong. She showed audiences that photo, the tiny girl and the massive biker, and explained that heroes come in all sizes, that age doesn't determine courage, and that sometimes the smallest voices carry the most important messages. She established a foundation in Blade's name, dedicated to helping children in crisis situations. The foundation provided emergency housing, connected families with resources, and taught children that their observations mattered, that they had the right to speak up, that adults should listen. The Rattlesnake Riders continued their work too, carrying on Blade's legacy of community service and protection. They still held the Brotherhood Run every year, and every year, Emma attended as their honorary member, welcomed with cheers and embraces. Carlos lived to see his daughter become a respected advocate, a published author. Her memoir about her experiences became a bestseller, and eventually a mother herself. When Emma's first child was born, a daughter she named Victoria, after Victor Blade Stone, Carlos held his granddaughter and cried tears of joy. "Your mother is a hero," he told baby Victoria. "She saved a man's life when she was just 7 years old. She noticed something wrong, and she was brave enough to speak up. Never forget that lesson, pay attention, trust your instincts, and always do the right thing, even when you're scared." Emma raised her daughter with those same lessons, teaching her to observe, to trust herself, and to speak up. The leather vest hung on Victoria's bedroom wall, a family heirloom that told a story of courage, honor, and the unlikely family that formed around a moment of bravery. If this story has touched your heart, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to Road Warriors Chronicle. We bring you stories that prove heroism comes in all forms, that courage isn't measured by size or age, and that sometimes the smallest voices carry the most important messages. Tell us in the comments, have you ever noticed something important that others missed? Have you ever had to speak up when you were terrified? What would you have done in Emma's position? This story reminds us that every day, we have opportunities to be heroes. Not through grand gestures or dramatic actions, but through simple choices, to notice when something is wrong, to trust our instincts, to speak up even when our voice shakes. Emma Rodriguez was just a 7-year-old girl, hungry, scared, and alone. She could have stayed hidden. She could have protected herself and ignored what she saw. But she chose courage. She chose to warn a stranger about danger, and in doing so, she saved a life and found a family. Victor Blade Stone was a hardened biker who thought nothing could rattle him. But he chose to listen when a frightened child burst into his world with a desperate warning. He chose to believe her instead of dismissing her. And that choice saved his life and changed hers forever. Their story proves that heroism isn't about being fearless. It's about doing the right thing despite fear. It's about noticing details that others miss. It's about speaking up when staying silent would be easier. It's about listening when others might ignore. In a world that often feels dark and dangerous, stories like Emma's remind us that courage still exists. That good people still fight to protect others. That children are often far braver than we give them credit for. And that sometimes, the most important thing we can do is simply listen, really listen, when someone tells us something is wrong. Emma Rodriguez noticed a man poison whiskey. She warned Victor Blade Stone. And in that moment of courage, she saved his life and inspired thousands of others to trust their instincts and speak up. Her story is a testament to the power of observation, the strength of conviction, and the courage it takes to do the right thing when everything inside you is screaming to run and hide. Remember her lesson: pay attention. Trust your instincts. Speak up. Listen. And never underestimate the impact one person, even a small, scared, 7-year-old girl, can have on the world. Thank you for watching and reading this complete story. Share it with someone who needs to hear that courage comes in all sizes. Subscribe for more stories that prove heroes are everywhere, often in the most unexpected places. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from today, and share a time when you or someone you know showed courage in a difficult situation.